I'm essentially the black sheep of my family because all my family were engineers. My father in particular was a civil engineer, and I think he was desperately disappointed when I didn't become a civil engineer. I don't think that's true. But I decided to take physics, and my first degree was in physics, and then I was invited to do high energy nuclear physics for PhD. But I never thought my mathematics was good enough, so that was a first choice, because high-energy nuclear physics is a lot to do with mathematics. And I thought, well, that's not really where I want to go. But I became very interested, actually, in what was becoming a new nuclear power program. The Magnox power stations were well advanced, but the AGRs were being developed. And I saw a master's course at Birmingham University in reactor physics. So I went down to Birmingham and did a master's degree in reactor physics. Whilst I was there, interestingly enough, there was another decision. I saw chaps down there that stayed on for doing a PhD, and they couldn't actually find a job. And the first decision there, I thought, well, that's not such a good idea. So there was a company called the Nuclear Power Group, which is now AMEC. But the Nuclear Power Group was in existence in Knutsford, and they were looking for folk, and I joined the Nuclear Power Group. And they were working on the steam-generating heavy water reactor for Stakeness in Scotland and Jarvis Bay in Australia. And it was the first attempt at a steam-generating heavy water reactor, one of which they'd built at Winfrith in Dorset, which is the laboratories down there, if you remember. And this was my first introduction to the nuclear industry, because within a year I was fired, because they lost both those projects, and they'd expanded the organisation with engineers and so on and so forth to take up that work. And it was first in, first out. Didn't care who you were, what you were first in, first out. I thought, phew, that's a good start. So I then went lecturing for a while in physics whilst I sort of caught my breath. And then I thought, well, do I actually want to carry on in this industry? And at the time, again, it's these things that happen in your life. And I actually made a list, and we were just talking about that earlier, about the things that happened. And one of the documents I read, and you can still find this on the internet, and it's called, I've forgotten the name of the document, Blueprint for Survival. That was what the document was called. And I've always been very interested in social issues and social interactions. I have quite an interest in history. But this document was quite dramatic. And this was, remember, the early 1970s, and it was looking forward into the 90s and the year 2000. And it was suggesting that if the world population got to around about 3,500 million to 4,000 million, we're now over 6,000 million, but if it got to 3 to 4,000 million people, then there'd be a desperate shortage of energy. And the only way they could see at the time of filling the gap was actually by a nuclear power program. And I got quite engaged again, and lo and behold, out of the blue, I got an invite to join a team which had actually nothing to do with civil power, but was in fact to do with submarines. And I went to join Rolls-Royce. I was invited to go for an interview, and I became a reactor physicist at Rolls-Royce, which was building on my work at Birmingham on an MSc. And I spent quite a while with Rolls-Royce, which was a great experience working on submarine cores, and spent quite a bit of time at Faslane and so on and so forth. I never actually went to sea in a submarine, which is what I always wanted to do. So I spent quite a bit of time there, and then I came back to what was then called the Nuclear Power Company, which was originally TNPG, but they'd been bought out, and they were known as a Nuclear Power Company, and they were based here at Knutsford, and also at in Leicestershire. I can't just remember the name of the area, but they were in Leicestershire, and they'd Whetstone, absolutely, Whetstone, yeah. And they'd both got the orders to build advanced gas-cooled reactors. And the two reactors I worked on were Hinckley B and Hunterston B, and the Whetstone guys worked on Dungeness and Hartlepool. And that was a great experience, it really was. My main tasks there were radiation shielding, not reactor physics, it was radiation shielding. And it was a terrific experience. Working on the AGR was great, and a lot of time to get down to actually look at the stations, as well as doing the analysis as well. And a little twist in the tail, we did some work on fast reactors, a little bit on Magnox, but not a great deal. But one twist in the tail was that we did some work for a PWR overseas, and this PWR was going to be built outside Tehran. And I spent a lot of time, and it was something we were talking about earlier, I spent a lot of time working out the energy deposition in the ponds. And I was very proud of all these calculations and everything. And my line manager used to go off periodically to abroad to deal with this. And one Saturday morning, we don't want to get too political, but if you actually look up on the websites, this thing was bombed to the ground. And it was done by the Israelis because they were very concerned about nuclear energy being diverted in the Middle East, and it was bombed to the ground. And I always remember saying to my wife, I cannot believe they've done that. I just cannot believe they've done that after all those calculations. The political implications of it never struck me at all, but it was this calculation. Oh my God. But then I was, again, a little bit out of the blue from what was Nuclear Power Company. I was invited to an interview at BNFL. I didn't apply, somebody who was in here, because they were expanding Sellafield, of course. And they were looking for a shielding criticality team to be built up. And I thought, oh, it's all tanks and pipe work. It's going to be terrible, you know. I thought, well, I'll go anyway. All tanks and pipe work. And I came here, BNFL, for an interview in the late 1980s. And I actually spent 25 years with BNFL. And it was a terrific experience to be within BNFL. And various decisions were made in BNFL. So I mean to say, I started off, I've always been a technical person. I've never sort of been into the administration and so on, so on. I've always been technical management. And I moved in BNFL really from being a radiation shielding analysis, working on an enormous number of facilities at Sellafield, which was a great experience, doing a lot of criticality work. But there was a very important decision made. I worked for BNFL on many, many plants at Sellafield for somewhere in the region of about 8 or 9 years. And being a shielding specialist, you have an enormous interaction with engineers. And that was actually where I came round in a full circle and came to the conclusion I was actually a lost mechanical engineer. All my family were engineers, and I came round in a complete circle because I used to spend a lot of time with the mechanical engineers and the process engineers. And it was a great experience, it really was. But I came to the conclusion if I don't actually personally make the effort to make a move, I could be here forever because I really enjoyed the job. I used to really enjoy the rapport with the engineers. And at that stage, I went to see the head of the safety assessment group and said, I'd like to join the safety assessment group. So I said, well, okay, come and join us, you know, a bit of chit-chat and da-di-da-di-da. And I did quite a bit of work on safety cases and safety analysis for BNFL on various plants, Capenhurst, Springfields and Sellafield. Whilst I was in that group, going back now late 1990s, I was invited to join the corporate centre. And you didn't get interviewed in those days to join the corporate centre. You actually got a tap on the shoulder and you went into the corporate centre. And what they were trying to do there, they were trying to set up a completely new independent safety assessment group which had been forced upon them by the regulator, or shall we say negotiated onto BNFL by the regulator, to take an independent look at safety cases. And they wanted a senior team in order to do that. And they also wanted a team of site inspectors setting up. And I was given the remit of setting up the INSA process and the site inspection team. And that was set up under, I think it was John Taylor originally, the chief executive then, Norman Askew, who was the following chief executive. And that was all set up and worked. But halfway through my experience in there, the regulator got quite concerned about the degree of use of probabilistic risk assessment on the design of facilities. They felt that probabilistic risk assessment was actually being used to not make engineering decisions. People were actually saying, well, it's 10 to the minus 6 per year. It's okay. And the regulator got very, very fretful about this, and they started introducing, or wanted introducing, new methodologies into BNFL for analysis. And I led a team in there for about 3 or 4 years, negotiating with the NII on new methodologies to go into the BNFL safety cases. And you'll be very familiar with the concept of design basis accident analysis if you've been around for a while. Design basis accident analysis was put in place. A whole new methodology is put in place for external event analysis, and and the whole issue was then surrounded by this INSA, Independent Nuclear Safety Assessment, and site inspection. And that more or less, I was then working very closely with my director, Paul Thomas, and I then got involved overseas with the South Africans with the pebble bed modular reactor, because BNFL had bought into being a shareholder in the pebble bed modular reactor. And they were having some difficulties on the safety side in the design, and a lady called Sue Cox, who's now Dame Sue Cox, asked me if I'd go out to South Africa and give a view back to her and the board as to whether there were real difficulties with the PBMR. So I went down there, and yes, they did have some difficulties. And the next question was, would you like to go down and help? We're from headquarters, we're here to help, you know. And so I took up an appointment where I didn't actually live in South Africa, but I visited very, very regularly. I'd do, say, 4 or 5 weeks working here and then spend, say, 2 weeks in South Africa. And that was a terrific project, a really, really good project. It was very, very exciting project. And it was one which was going to really be a flagship for Africa. And the South Africans had a great strategy, really, for the PBMR. Unfortunately, it fell very foul of all this turmoil with the financial situation. The design was going along pretty well. It needed kicking into shape here and there, but it was going along pretty well. I got involved with the fuel plant down there, which was a unique pebble manufacturing process, quite different from, say, AGR or PWR plant. These were pebbles, quite unique. The reactor itself had about 400,000 pebbles in it, and they were about the size of a cricket ball, and they were about 9 kilograms of uranium, and there were 15,000 little pellets, about 6 millimeter diameter in each of the balls, and the balls were made of graphite. So it was a very unique design. Not all that unique that it hadn't been done before. It had been built by the Germans in the 1970s, and indeed the South Africans had actually just got hold of the drawings. But the manufacturing process was quite difficult. And there was many, many safety issues involved, and of course quite a lot of criticality issues involved. And I met many colleagues from Springfields who were out there dealing with safety and criticality issues. Unfortunately, all that came to grief, and I just then came back to BNFL. And then when the corporate centre was closed down, I went and started my own business. And I continued to work with the South Africans. They asked me to carry on. And I worked with them for about another 3 years, then they collapsed with the problems we've got at the moment. And after many exchanges with DBD over probably 3 or 4 years, I eventually decided I'd come and join them. And that, again, was a decision I made to leave my own company, because I was a sole trader. And I'd been involved in trying to get a particular contract. And I tend to be very, I like things to happen. I'm not very patient. And I've noticed in here people are very, very patient. So when I lost some major contracts, I thought, right, that's it. I'm not carrying on messing around with this. But you've got to be very, very patient in this world, and I'm not. But when DBD said, well, would you like to come and join us, which was beginning of this year, I said, yeah, well, okay, I'll come and join you. So that's where I am. So if you can follow that trail, there have been some decisions been made and some decisions made for me.
My career path is incredibly different from John's. I don't have a technical background. Having been in this industry now for 35 years, I understand technical issues. I understand the business, the industry, I understand what its factories do, I understand what companies do in this industry. But for an accountant, at the outset, I can take you on a path that gets me from then until now. So I start off with now. That is a picture taken earlier of this year with the chairman of Westinghouse UK, which is David Bonzer. David Bonzer and I worked together a lot in the past, and I'm very proud to be working with him now. And he and I set up Westinghouse UK for Westinghouse almost 2 years ago now. And our job was to integrate all of Westinghouse businesses into the United Kingdom and provide one offering for UK customers as a platform for further expansion in Europe. And I'll come back to that. I'll circle right back to where we are now. Here's a picture that's almost 25 years ago. I tried to find one earlier than that, and I always wish I could get the picture that they have in your personal file of the day that you were first interviewed and see what that picture, I've saw other people's, I've never actually found mine. So, I started work in this industry with BNFL at Sellafield in 1975. Those pictures were taken over 10 years later in 1986. So what happened in the 10 or 11 years between that? Well, I started off by writing out sort of all of my jobs that I'd had from when I started with BNFL. And it was a fascinating exercise. And the reason for that is that I've rarely looked back at my early career. In fact, I've rarely looked back into my later career. I see everything in the future. What needs to be done tomorrow. The past is all about experience and learning from experience. And I'll come back to some points that I think you need to bear in mind. But learning from experience is a big one. And I don't just mean that on a safety front. It's understanding what you have done and then using that for what you can do. So by going back through all of these jobs, it triggered fantastic memories. And I realized that by just putting a list of jobs up in ways that probably young people these days would not understand. You know, clerical assistant, clerical officer, maybe. And when you go back to the mid-70s, you know, this was a civil service management structure. So then it went in a hierarchy of clerical assistant, clerical officer, executive officer, higher executive officer, senior executive officer, all the way through. And then you got into management, and then you got management jobs. So I realized that probably wouldn't mean very much to anyone. It's a list of jobs. I tried to then phrase it in a sort of different way and say, well, you know, broadly speaking, sort of what has my career looked like when I finished education. Finished A-levels in 1975. I didn't go straight to university. I went into employment directly with BNFL at Sellafield, or Windscale and Calder Works, as it was more usually known at the time. I started, if you look at the rungs on a ladder in this industry, on the very bottom rung as a clerical assistant in the general office on Calder Hall Power Station when it was an operating power station. I studied ONC Business Studies at the local technical college, West Cumbria Technical College, and progressed from there to get a sponsorship from BNFL to study accountancy at Newcastle. So I was, a year later, getting into university. I studied accountancy, qualified as an accountant, and at the turn of the 80s moved into what was then a corporate function, which was internal audit, which was a very specialised form of accountancy, looking at the management systems across the company. And that was a real fantastic opportunity because I was never based at one particular factory. We had an office here at Risley near Warrington, and from there we would cover all of the systems on all of the BNFL sites, but then at contractors that were supplying to BNFL. And during the early 80s, that was a fantastic time for the then British Nuclear Fuels, building Pond 5 at Sellafield and the beginnings of, and thinking about Thorpe. And we employed a massive range of contractors. And I was fortunate enough to visit them, work with them, look at their systems. And so I would say that that was the beginning of the professional part of my career. I was a specialist accountant. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a fantastic job. I always remember going home on Friday. I'd been working down at Risley, and I went home and I said to my wife at the time, I love my job so much, I would do it for nothing. I would never advise anybody in this room or anybody watching this DVD to use that as a negotiating stance. But that's how much I enjoyed what I was doing at the time. And then I was actually in that role for probably about 7 years, and I really loved it. There's a small band of professionals, great expertise, and then someone in the head office HR department said to me, "You have to spread your wings, Mike, and do something different. You can't work in the internal audit department all of your life." So they offered me, or I was offered a choice of 2 jobs. One was to go to Chapel Cross, and one was to go to Sellafield as the works administration manager, which was like right out of my comfort zone. No real idea what it was all about, other than there are a number of departments I'd been in there and audited and found that improvements would really help them. So it was thrown back at me to say, well, go ahead and improve these departments, you know. So really I couldn't turn that opportunity down. So in the mid-80s, went back to Sellafield and had a progression of roles there, from looking after the site administration team, which was hundreds and hundreds of people, to helping them through the late 80s and the early 90s in a very special challenge, and that was with quality assurance arrangements. And they were necessary to be implemented at Sellafield as a management system, because one of the criticisms from the 1986 NII team inspection of Sellafield following the 1983 liquor release to C was it lacked management or comprehensive and consistent management systems. So the company decided to implement quality arrangements. I was asked for 3 months to advise on management systems and audit arrangements. The 3 months lasted 5 years. I had a fantastic time in QA. Again, that was a tremendous team. We all, at the senior level, studied exams for the Institute of Quality Assurance to get membership. And we had a target of 5 years with the regulator to implement full, comprehensive, third-party accredited quality systems by December 1992. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, I do. I remember it very well.
And we succeeded with that, and that was a fantastic job, real sense of achievement. And then the electricity supply industry changed, privatised. BNFL as a company responded. It changed its structure. One of the issues that it had at Sellafield was its cost base. I was asked to go and head up services departments to take 25% of the cost of those services out of the business over a 5-year period from 1st of April 94 through to 31st of March 1999. And again, we established a facilities group that employed in total 3,350 people. And at the time, there was about 7,500 permanent employees at Sellafield, and imagine half of that number were employed in support services. And again, I had a truly insightful time working with some really great people on how we could bring that cost base down, and working with people right across the whole breadth of the site, from top to bottom, you know, from managers and senior managers to cleaners and cooks and gardeners, and we took 57% of that cost out in 3 years. And, you know, memorable piece of work. And one of the groups that I was working with at the time was the Sellafield Transport Department. And when I actually left Sellafield, they presented me with this Cumbrian slate model of a Foden static back wagon. And as part of my adventures with quality assurance before that, I helped Cumbria Ambulance Service to be one of the first services to introduce quality systems into its operations, and they presented me with this, which is again a granite plinth with the cap badge of the senior officer of Cumbria Ambulance Service, which I was incredibly proud of. And they asked me again, well, I'd been working with facilities, but with my quality background, they asked me to go to Dounreay and help them do some work on quality systems at Dounreay, and they presented me with a book on Caithness when I'd finished doing that. So I found all these in a cupboard, and they just brought back those vivid memories. However, in the late 90s, working with Graham Smith and other senior members of the site team at Sellafield, I retrained in operations. I'd been halfway to it with working with services, and I was running radiological services and services in the separation area at Sellafield. I retrained in operations, and I ran the Drigg site, waste compaction plant, waste treatment complex, and plutonium stores at Sellafield. So I had to do a serious amount of homework to demonstrate I could be a duly authorised person and swept to run those sites. So, you know, I had to get the physics and chemistry books out and really do my homework. Tremendous experience for me. I then left BNFL as a company, and with all my work in the services sector, I'd been determined to get some external experience, and I was appointed general manager for a UK services company managing the infrastructure at BAE Systems sites, a firm called MCOR Facility Services, based in Altrincham. I was the general manager for them, and that was so interesting, so such a provider of new information I'd never seen from the commercial side of the fence. We're in a commercial contracting business. And then, having been in that job for a year or so, the entire nuclear industry changed. And my old company, BNFL, had to be a contractor. And so a discussion with old colleagues, they felt it would be a good idea if I could come bring some commercial contracting experience back into BNFL. And that matched with my sort of history with the company and its different sites and its operations. You know, I came back to help them shift from BNFL to a contracting company under Nuclear Decommissioning Authority. I went to Springfields in 2004 to help the transition for 1st of April 2005 to set up Springfields Fuels as a contractor to the NDA, and I became the managing director at Springfields. During my time in waste treatment plants, I spent 2 spells in the US, working at Oak Ridge in Tennessee, at the East Tennessee Technology Park on the low-level, commissioning the low-level waste compactor. And that helped me when I was running Springfields to have some understanding of my American colleagues in Westinghouse who were running the site, and particularly, you know, the US perspective on plant management. And after 3 very, very successful years at Springfields as the MD, Westinghouse decided to set up Westinghouse UK. I was appointed as the first chief executive, David Bonser as chairman, and my mission since that time has been to grow the Westinghouse business here in UK and Europe. And on that, we successfully negotiated the return of the Springfield site from the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority for the 1st of April last year. So that's now Westinghouse site on a 150-year lease. I'm hopefully close with my colleagues to securing a first-of-a-kind deal with utilities for AP1000 in the United Kingdom, and we look forward to the results of that competition early in the new year. And for our services business, we joint ventured with Cumbria Nuclear Solutions, bid for the second decommissioning framework agreement at Sellafield, and was successful with other contractors in that work. And I look forward to developing our interest in West Cumbria, particularly the Sellafield site, and also establishing our presence for what I believe will be 3 AP1000s built in West Cumbria, which will commence during this next decade. So I wanted to sort of point out some sort of talking points, and maybe this is something we can get into debate about with John and I. You know, and John mentioned it. Do you want to be a functional specialist and have a career in your function? Or are you more interested in general management, and do you feel you have the competencies for that? You need to start thinking about that now. It won't just happen. You know, do you understand how business works? You know, you may understand nuts and bolts, and you may understand the physics and chemistry of the industry. Do you know how the business end of this industry works? You know, where money comes from, how money is made, how investments are financed. What does operating profit mean? What does cash mean? Do you go home on a Friday concerned about how much money is in the bank? Some firms will, and some people in some firms will, and some people in other firms won't. Do you understand that? Do you understand your own personal value? You might be a good engineer, a good chemist, a good physicist, but do you understand your own value and how you put that into a business and how the business recognizes that? And then, you know, you need to be able to apply that. And that means that you need to develop that personal value. You know, as professional people, you know, we all have continued professional development. That means something to us all. What does it mean about applying learning and development into your career? And hands up those who've got what we would call a career development plan. John and I were talking about this earlier. You know, I'm not sure that I ever really had one, but I always knew what I loved doing, and I always knew what I liked. And from that, I knew what I was good at, and I knew, and know how I can add value into the business. And I've been fortunate to benefit from that. But then, you know, if you aspire to leading in your chosen path, either as a professional or as a general manager, do you understand leadership? Do you really understand leadership? Do you understand the difference between management and leadership? Do you want to be a manager? Do you want to be an expert professional? Do you want to be a leader? If you wish to be a leader, you must understand what differentiates leaders from everyone else. Can you create a vision? Think about it. Can you? If you watch The Apprentice and you watch Lord Sugar, he's looking at those people across that table and saying, who in that team can lead this business? Who can create the vision? Who can create a way forward for everyone? You know, and having got that, can you actually then put direction to it? It's okay seeing the picture and it's okay seeing the long-term vision, but can you as a leader take responsibility and put direction to that? You know, and that's a sort of summary of sort of some key points that I've learned from my journey in my career. And, you know, I would say to Lord Sugar, I'm still an apprentice. And I've been in this industry for 35 years. And the nuclear industry is a fantastic industry. And I am still an apprentice. I've still got a lot to give. And when I look at the young people that I work with and I see the potential that exists, you know, it thrills me to see the potential in this industry. And, you know, you young people in this room and people who may watch this, you need to understand how they can own that future and contribute to it.
I took a very personal technical route, and I always wanted to be in the technical arena. I never really, I was interested about the money and things like that. Some people don't go home and worry about money. I never did, because that was never my forte. I was never interested in that side of the business. I was always very interested in it succeeding technically, which is very important as well. If you can handle as much money as you like, but if it doesn't succeed technically, then you're on a hiding to nothing. And it was just interesting to see how those two scenarios actually worked out. But mine was a positive decision to remain on the technical field. And I got to the point of working very, very closely with my director, of course. I mean, so we were sort of hand in glove towards the end of the game. But I sort of never aspired to be the chief executive or managing director, because I wanted to remain very, very much in the technical field. But touching on the point of leadership, the leadership issue is very, very important, particularly in the technical field. You cannot have people just doing what they like when they like. You've got to demonstrate leadership of how you move this business in particular from one technical point to the other. And I did feel echoes from Mike's point on that the leadership aspect of it is very, very important. And you have to get into your own mind, what is the difference between a leader and a manager? And they are quite distinctly different. And you can tell leaders when you see them. So you've got to imagine, well, what are the qualities? But you can tell a leader when you see one, or when you're with them.
You think leaders are required to drive change rather than manage it?
Yes, I think that's a very good observation. They have the vision and they essentially drive the situation to achieve that vision. I'm trying to think of an example. Well, of course, we're very familiar with many leaders, but military leaders or Napoleonic type leaders, I mean, say they have a vision to do something and they drive and lead to do it. And the old saying is they lead from the front. But good leaders actually do. They do actually lead from the front, and they lead by example. One of my great interests, as folk I work with know, is safety culture. I became very, very interested in safety culture. 90% of all accidents in industry are caused by safety culture, and it's due to lack of leadership. The whole thing that drives it is lack of leadership. You have very good leadership in the safety arena, particularly in this industry, and I believe it has had very good leadership in safety in this industry. It's not a matter of management, it's actually laying down expectations and expecting them to be delivered. I see that as a leadership issue.
I think that to drive truly embedded change that's really successful requires every single person in the organisation to actually play a part of that. And one of the my great bugbears, if you like, is that people from top to bottom in an organisation do not understand how much potential they have to make that change. Everyone, every single person has the ability to make a change. It doesn't matter where you are in the organisation. So it takes everyone. However, you do need to have someone or a small group of people who actually understand where you're going to, and other people will follow. Other people will help you get there. But you need to have someone who actually sets that challenge out and moves towards it. So I think what you see in the sort of in a workforce, in supervisors, managers and leaders, is a thread that goes right from top to bottom that says we understand simply where we're going. And to give you an example, I went to Springfields in 2004-05. My job was to close the site. Absolutely crystal clear, close the site. That was my remit. And there was three aspects to it with the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority. Do it safer, do it quicker, and do it cheaper. I'd been there less than a year, and it was a beautiful autumn day, and I was walking around the site at lunchtime, and I stood looking at the oxide fuel complex, which at the time was 10 years old. And as we all know in the nuclear industry, that's a baby. Leading edge, world-leading technology in that plant, and we're going to close it down as quick as we possibly can. I thought this cannot be the right thing to do. Now, I didn't really know what the alternative was, other than we're not going to do this. You know, we have to come up with another plan. So I went back and I worked with my colleagues at the time, and I said, this plant, and this factory, and the people on it, you know, can participate in the wider Westinghouse. Why can we not build fuel for Europe? And then, you know, the UK, the resurgence in the UK nuclear program was a twinkle in Gordon Brown's eye. And we made plans to work with Nuclear Decommissioning Authority to change the whole mission of the site. And I spent inordinate amount of time with the authority, with Parliament, and we changed the plan. And we got the site back. And it's part now of a magnificent portfolio of work and opportunities for Westinghouse in this country. It's not rocket science. It really isn't. You know, and my colleagues will tell you, I'm no strategist. You know, someone at some time has to work out the way forward, and then you drive for it. And it doesn't matter whether it's a big company, small group, football team, you know, you name it. There has to be a leader somewhere. And that leader has to work with others to instill that sense of direction. And that's why you see some people are so successful and other people struggle. And you yourself as an employee will know that when you're properly engaged and when you're not, when you feel that you're given that extra effort, when you feel that you're adding value. And there'll be times when you actually don't feel like that. And when you don't feel like that, you have to challenge yourself as to why.
What do you think was like the one or maybe two pieces of advice you picked up from, say, other people down the line throughout your careers? Because obviously you both really enjoyed what you've done over the years.
I think the piece of advice I got is something that Mike actually touched on earlier, and that was the issue of don't become too focused. I think at one time I said I was enjoying the job I was doing too much, but I was almost involved partially in this rush to build Thorpe and the big plants, and therefore the company was actually very, very interested in doing that, in building and getting things done. And it wasn't all that ready to invite people to do things. In other words, change and look at their other career aspects. And really, it was somebody who actually said that to me, that, you know, if you stay where you are, you're going to be there forever. But then you've got this tug of war then between what you're really enjoying and then actually making the change. But I remember that quite distinctly, that I did make the personal change to move out of the job I did do to go into another discipline. And again, it was going into a comfort zone, as you say, that I knew nothing about really. I only contributed to safety cases and safety arguments through shielding and criticality. But safety case business was an entirely different issue. I'm trying to think of another example. I mean, say we're trolling back through, you know, 30 odd years now. But I think possibly when I first came to BNFL, or when I was at the interview stage, one of the things that changed my mind when I was at the interview was diversity. Again, this issue of diversity. I knew the opportunities could exist in BNFL more than they could have just with the AGRs, because it was clear that once the AGR plants were built, we were going nowhere else, and we didn't. The only plant we ever built after the AGR was Sizewell PWR, and that was more or less shipped in by the Americans and tinkered with around the edges. So to me, the future actually did rest with BNFL, but it was the wider opportunities that were presented to me when I first came here that I thought were very good in terms of advice, even though at the time I did come in as a specialist. And that proved to be so. I mean, say, for my own personal technical ambitions, I achieved what I wanted to do within the company on the technical front.
I've came across hundreds of pieces of advice that have been given to me and things that have been said to me that have inspired me. You know, from many, many different sources. Someone once said to me probably about 20 years ago now, when I was talking to them about how I was working in quality assurance and how much I enjoyed it, but at some point in time I was going back to what I really did as an accountant, because I always felt I was just on vacation from being an accountant, helping out on other things. And that person said to me, always recognize the potential in yourself and always stretch into it. Always stretch into it. Don't just look at it, step into it. You know, move. And even if it's difficult, even if it's right outside your comfort zone, even if it looks like a risky shot, you know, hesitancy is always the chance to draw back. But step forward, moving forward and taking those, being bold and taking that step has a genius to it. And you should recognise that that's in you as well. That was one thing that stuck in my mind. Another thing that was once said to me, you know, which I think is brilliant, and I always come back to this as a touchstone, always begin with the end in mind. So don't just start out on any path. you know, the paths may be different to get where you're going, but always have that end point in mind. And something that's more personal and has been a sort of cornerstone, I think, of my career over the last sort of 15 years at least, is respect other people, everyone, every single person in the organisation, every person outside of it, customers, you know, people generally, always work from the basis that I'm okay and you're okay. That's the starting point for everyone, and never forget that. You know, you're not better than everyone else, you're just different. Other people are not worse than you, they're just different. So always start from that point of respect. And on that same person 2 years later in 1998 once said to me, in the middle of quite a strong debate, something that again has always stuck with me, and I give you good counsel, that seek first to understand and then be understood. And whether you're in meetings or whether you have technical debates or issues or problems, seek first to understand and then be understood. So understand what other people are trying to say and understand their point of view, and then, having understood that, then try and make yourself understood. So they're sort of little gems that I've picked up. But what they do is, and I think the important part of them, and John's is a different aspect of the same thing. It's that be in charge of your own response to situations, be in charge of your own opportunities. And it doesn't really matter whether you choose to be a leading professional, which John is, or it doesn't matter whether you end up sort of in general management as a choice. And wherever you are in the organisation, always remember you're in control of that.
Yeah, if I could just add to that a little bit, and it's just whilst Mike was talking, one key change that did occur for me, and advice that was given to me, and that was when I mentioned that I actually went to work with the South African folk on behalf of BNFL, and that came quite out of the blue. And I was quite nervous about it at first because it was a whole area, this particular area of safety culture. Although I'd spent a lot of time in human performance and so on and so forth, I'd not actually engaged in safety culture. And we were going down to deal essentially with a group of people who were like, without being unfair and being very respectful to them, they'd never built a nuclear power station before. And they were coming really from like the 1960s with their thinking. And to try and influence those, some of them who were extremely good engineers in their own right, was extremely difficult. And I was really quite nervous about that. And I did have a choice to say no. And I actually said yes. And what that led to was many, many technical changes for me. I became very, very strongly involved with the International Atomic Energy Agency with regards to the whole issue of safety culture, and spent a lot of time working with them on the theory and practice. And I was then invited to go to many reviews with them, and I've been all over the world with the IEA on safety culture reviews. With the support of BNFL, of course, because it was of interest to BNFL. And I was invited by the regulator of South Africa, whilst I was down there, to go and do a review on another plant, which was nothing to do with the PBMR, which again was very, very interesting. And ultimately, really, I became quite a national and international expert in this field. And it was quite something that I hadn't even thought about at, say, the start of the 1990s. But it was just that decision again. Somebody invited me to do something, and I could have actually said, well, you know, I'm not so sure about that, because it was a lot of hard work, and you reminded me of talking about flying. I used to fly very regularly to South Africa, and it's 18 hours and 15 minutes from my house to Johannesburg, because I used to, another 15 minutes and we're there. So, but the outcome of that was a completely new technology for me, and also the opportunity to see how other people operate their facilities, and in order to bring that back to BNFL, because if you're not very careful, organisations can become very, very insular. Yes. And as Mike said, originally BNFL was very much a civil service organisation. It came out of the military, as you well know, and they did have this attitude of, you can't tell us anything. They did really have that attitude, very rigorous with the experts, and they were experts in the field, but it almost got worse and worse. But after the changes that occurred within BNFL, they became much more open and much more inviting. So it was always the opportunity to go and see how other people operated their reactors and how they operated their plants and what information we could bring back. So if an opportunity does come to you, the message really is, don't just say, it's all a bit too much for me, that. There could be a great opportunity for you. This could have all fizzled out into nothing within a matter of months, but it didn't. It became a very, very exciting and interesting project. And I also had my daytime job, as I used to call it, which was dealing with issues within BNFL. But it was for me so successful that, of course, when I actually left BNFL, and BNFL knew all about it, there was nothing under the table about it, I was invited by the South Africans to carry on with my own contract with them, because hopefully I was adding value to their business. Unfortunately, the banking community did the dirty on us, and that was that. But it's just this issue about, if you see an opportunity, then take it. If it fizzles out, it fizzles out. But on the other hand, it might be something really, really good for you.
It's the chance to actually do that, you know, and to take that risk. And I think John actually has just made one of the most powerful points of this evening's discussion that I think you should take away. And that is, and we've talked about the work we've done outside of this country, you know, and certainly with Westinghouse, I've had massive opportunity to travel. You look outside, and don't get locked down in your own business. You know, have an external view rather than an internal one. Understand what you need to do in your own business and your own job. But when you get the opportunity to step outside of that, you'll see completely different horizons and get a completely different perspective. So that would be one great piece of advice. If in your job and your career you get the opportunity to do that at whatever time, you know, take it, because it will give you a genuinely different perspective on both on the work that you do, the company that you work for, its place in the industry, how the industry fits into global economy. You see that outside of your own business.
Yeah, I think one of the most stunning things for me in that issue of taking on what other countries are doing, we tend as a nation even to become slightly insular. And about 5 or 6 years ago now, I went to Busan in Korea with the IAEA, and we were invited to go and see what they were doing in terms of reactors being built. And UK has talked about building this and building that, building the other. And these Koreans took us to the coast just outside Busan. And there was 2 French reactors been operating for about 5 years. There was 2 the Koreans had just built and were ready to go into operation. There was 2 holes in the ground here with the concrete up to, you know, so many floors high. And they pointed down the road and they said, that's where we're putting the other 2. And in that row of reactors, there was more reactor power there than the United Kingdom had. And there was none of this wringing of hands and we better think about it. Oh, they were actually getting on with it. And I felt quite embarrassed that these people were actually getting on with it. They'd made the decision, they'd taken the decision, and they were moving forward. And these things were going to come out of the ground. And of course they had lots and lots of young engineers there because they needed these guys to operate these facilities. 2 of them were French, the rest of them were their own Korean designs. And I believe, is it Qatar just recently? I think it's Qatar, has just given a big contract to Korea for building Korean reactors in Qatar. Where's the UK business? You know, I sometimes get a bit worried. But that made me come back and think about the programme here. And I think it's very, very important that we as individuals, at every opportunity we get for this industry, promote the industry. It's very, very important because politicians sometimes are quite dithery, and they of course, we're in a democracy, of course we are, and they listen very carefully to what people say, and then they make their decisions. And in many respects, the country as a whole is still nervous about nuclear power, I think. Still, okay, they have these regular questionnaires and so on and so forth, but I still think there's an under-element of nervousness, both in the political arena and with the public. So every opportunity's got to be given to demonstrate what the capability is of the new class of reactors. The AGRs I always thought were a fantastic reactor. I still do. They're very low energy density, If anything goes wrong, you can walk away from them. They were very, very expensive to build. They have been real good workhorses. I would have liked to have seen another string of them, but of course that never happened, and the PWR now has the centre stage. And the modern reactors are extremely good. And the PWR, of course, the PBMR had many inherent features like the current LWR. Different physics, but they still had the inherent features. So we've a lot of work to do still, I think, to push this over the cliff, you know.
I think the UK are quite nervous about the whole notion of nuclear power still, because there's just not enough education about it. It's almost like it's still swept under the carpet, but hopefully we do still want new nuclear power. Mike, how do you see Westinghouse going forward in the future? What are Westinghouse's ambitions, and what are the ambitions for obviously your future workforce and its emphasis on UK new nuclear?
Yeah. Great question again. Where do I see Westinghouse in, let's go forward 10 years? I expect a fleet of AP1000s in the United Kingdom, with at least 3 under construction, 1 just about to come online, if not online, with 4 or 5 units behind those. So I would like, you know, by the time we get to 2021, 22, be looking at a full AP1000 fleet of at least 9 reactors. Fuel being built for the British AP1000 and European reactors out of Springfields, and those reactor units being serviced from a Westinghouse workforce based in the United Kingdom to service that fleet. Working also on the lifetime plan for AGRs, so making sure those units we get maximum lifetime out of the AGR, working with the EDF Energy to provide fuel for them and also servicing of the AGR. What does that mean for Westinghouse? It means massive investment in skills going forward, graduates, apprentices for the longer term. The supply chain, establishing significant contribution from UK suppliers, and we would expect up to 80% of the value of the AP1000 reactor to be provided by a UK-based supply chain. So, I would see us based out of central Lancashire. Our fuel plant is there. We'll have project offices on the plants where construction will be taking place, and that will be at Wilford and Albury and at Sellafield. We would expect offices, project offices close to the customers. So Horizon Nuclear Power in Gloucester, hopefully the Iberdrola, GDF Suez, Scottish and Southern Group in West Cumbria, and again at Wilford and Albury. So I see British Westinghouse as one of the central, if not the most central company in the UK nuclear programme in 10 years' time. And that's my mission for Westinghouse, the people that currently work for it and the employees that will work for Westinghouse on that programme. And I'm absolutely confident that that picture will come to fruition.